Every time I got paid when I was young, I thought I had earned the right to breathe a little easier. That is how most people think about a paycheck. A paycheck feels like permission. Permission to relax, permission to spend, permission to celebrate, permission to stop thinking so hard for a few days because at least for now, the machine has fed you again. I understand that feeling. I have felt it. I do not judge people for it. But I will tell you something that changed my life, and I think it can change yours. The paycheck is not the reward. The paycheck is the test. The question is never whether you earned it. The question is what happens in the first hour after it arrives. That is where futures separate. That is where ordinary earners slowly become owners, or where talented people spend decades proving they can work hard without ever building the structure that would let them work less. Most people think wealth is built in the marketplace. It is not at first. At first, wealth is built in the sequence you run when money arrives. Do you consume first and save what is left? Do you upgrade your lifestyle to match the newest version of your income? Do you let every raise recruit a new monthly obligation before your future ever gets a vote? Do you buy relief, status, motion, and better-looking normal? Or do you force the paycheck to begin working for a life larger than the one it merely finances today? That is the difference. I have spent my life around capital, around businesses, around markets, around people who started with nothing, and around people who inherited almost everything. The public likes simple explanations. They like to say the rich are smarter, luckier, greedier, more ruthless, more connected. Sometimes those things matter, but underneath the noise, I have found that one distinction keeps reappearing. The wealthy do not simply have more money. They use each new floor of money differently. That is the lesson hidden inside the material you gave me. The average person gets a paycheck and sees spending power. The disciplined person gets a paycheck and sees survival margin. The serious builder gets a paycheck and sees deployable capital. The future owner gets a paycheck and asks a colder question. How much of this can I convert into something that will one day make me less dependent on the next paycheck? That is the whole game. And if you never ask that question, then the years can pass in a very cruel way. You can become more educated, more skilled, more promoted, more impressive, more tired, and still remain a beautifully compensated dependent. You can move up inside somebody else's machine without ever building one that belongs to you. That is why I do not think the real financial divide is between rich people and poor people. The real divide is between people who understand what a paycheck is for and people who do not. If you misunderstand the paycheck, no raise will save you. It may entertain you for a while. It may flatter you. It may decorate your life. It may improve your zip code, your car, your watch, your dinners, your vacations, the quality of your excuses, but it will not free you. Freedom comes only when the paycheck stops being treated like an answer and starts being treated like raw material. I learned this in stages. At first, like most people, I thought money was mainly about level, how much came in, how much I had, how much more I could reach. Then I learned what almost nobody explains properly. Wealth is not mainly about level, it is about sequence. What happens first, what happens automatically, what happens before your impulses get a vote, what happens before your lifestyle expands to absorb what could have become assets. That is why I tell young people not to worship income. Income matters, of course, but income without sequence is one of the easiest ways to build a life that looks successful from the outside and feels permanently demanding from the inside. So let me say this plainly, your paycheck should not be meeting your cravings before it meets your future. That one reversal changes almost everything. Most people never make it because they skip the lobby. I like that metaphor very much. Before the elevator moves, before the visible ascent begins, there is a room where you learn the rules. The public hates this room because it is humbling. The room asks whether you even speak the language of money, not whether you can talk about it at dinner, not whether you can quote a few slogans about index funds, inflation, and compound interest. I mean, whether you actually know what the machinery is doing when dollars move through your life. Do you understand the difference between debit and credit, not as a moral sermon, but as a question of protection, float rewards, and future access to other people? Money, do you know what a Roth IRA is beyond the phrase? Do you know why low-cost broad ownership beats expensive theatrical activity for most people? Do you know what happens when every market panic frightens the public into selling while quietly making the long-term buyer richer? Do you know how to look at a paycheck not only as income but as deployable capital? If you do not know these things, that is not a moral failure, but it is a real disadvantage, because you cannot rise through a system whose language you do not speak. When I was a young employee, one of the most useful things I ever learned was that poor people often try to flex to look rich, while rich people often structure themselves so the public cannot even tell what is happening. I do not mean that every rich person is quiet. Plenty are peacocks. I mean that the strongest form of wealth is often invisible in the early years because it is not being spent on display. It is being accumulated as claims. That is the word that matters. Claims on businesses, claims on future cash flow, claims on productive assets, claims on markets, claims on time, claims on options. The paycheck matters because it is one of the few recurring moments in life when the future shows up in liquid form and asks you what kind of person you are. Most people answer emotionally, a smaller group answers structurally. Let us go to the ground floor. If you are living between $0 and $50,000 a year, or any version of life where the paycheck still feels like a monthly rescue, then you are not yet in the wealth game. You are in the survival game. This is not an insult. It is simply the truth. The rules are different here. When you are on the ground floor, the public gives you advice that sounds mature, but is often too general to save you. Budget better. Save 10%. Invest slowly. Hope for the best. There is some wisdom in all of that. But if you are on the floor where one unpleasant surprise can throw you into debt, the first thing you need is not elegance. It is control. You must know your survival number. I do not mean what you like to spend. I do not mean the version of your life you narrate. I mean the real monthly cost of continuing to exist without drama, rent, groceries, transport, utilities, insurance, minimums that cannot be ignored. That number is not your identity. It is your oxygen requirement. People avoid this because they think precision will make them anxious. Precision does not create anxiety. It reveals it. And that is useful because revealed anxiety can be acted on. The man who does not know his number is not calm. He is blind. Once you know your survival number. The next question becomes brutally practical. How many months of that number do you have in cash if your income disappears? Not invested, not theoretically available. Not, I could probably figure something out. I mean actual liquid runway. If the answer is 0, 1, or 2, then your financial life is not really a plan yet. It is an exposed position. That is why I tell people on the ground floor to build reserves and destroy toxic debt with near religious seriousness. The world likes to glamorize investing because investing sounds like wealth. But if you are carrying credit card balances at punishing rates, payday debt, or any high-interest burden that compounds against you, then your financial life is being eaten from the inside. You cannot build on top of that with dignity. You may look active, you may even own some assets, but the leak is stronger than the gain. That is why I do not mind whether you prefer the avalanche or the snowball method, as long as you understand the deeper point. Bad debt is not just a line item. It is future labor sold cheaply to preserve present disorder. Eliminate it. Now, I want to say something unfashionable at the beginning. Your best asset is often not the stock market. It is you. People become upset when I say this because finance culture loves to sound universal. Just buy the market. Fine. For many people, that is sound advice, and I want broad ownership started early. But if you are on the first floor with small savings and low income, the highest return asset class available may be the skill that lifts your earnings power dramatically. If a $2,000 investment in certifications, licensing, sales ability, technical competence, deal literacy, or business fluency can change your income by $20,000 a year, that is not a side detail. That is an extraordinary return. The public likes to separate self-investment from investing as though one is soft and the other is real. That is foolish. The highest return investment for many low-income people is acquiring scarcity. Scarcity of skill, scarcity of credibility, scarcity of ability that markets will pay up for. This is how floors change. Not just by saving harder, though that matters, by making yourself more difficult to replace and then forcing the paycheck to flow through a structure that does not waste the increase. That is the real beginning. Then we move to the next floor, $50,000 to $100,000 a year. This is where many people make their first serious mistake because it feels like climbing but is often only improved labor. The pay is better, the life looks sharper, the confidence grows, and because the income is finally large enough to produce some comfort, people start confusing comfort with escape. It is not escape. It is only a more pleasant gravity field. This is where the first 100,000 matters so much. Charlie Munger was right about that. The first 100,000 is brutally hard because it is still being built mostly by your effort and your discipline. The market helps, but it does not yet dominate the story. You are still pushing the boulder uphill. That is why the sequence on this floor matters more than almost anything else in personal finance. Capture free money first. If the employer offers a match, take it. There are few cleaner returns available to ordinary people, then use the tax shelters intelligently. That does not mean blindly stuffing every available dollar into retirement accounts without thinking. That is one of the places where generic advice gets people into trouble. Some people need maximum retirement acceleration. Others need flexibility and liquid capital because they are trying to buy businesses, invest in deals, build a property base, or create optionality before old age. The right question is not, what is the one correct account? The right question is, what is my destination, and which mix of tax advantage and access best serves it? That is how allocators think. A Roth IRA is magic for the young because taxes paid now can buy decades of untaxed compounding later. A 401k match is free money. A taxable brokerage account is freedom capital because it can be used before old age to buy opportunities that retirement accounts cannot reach cleanly. Different rails serve different futures. That is what the public misses. They want a single answer because single answers relieve them of thinking. Thinking is what wealth requires. Then comes the market itself. I have been called many things in my life, but one thing I have never wanted to be is busy without advantage. This is why low-cost broad index ownership appeals to me for the ordinary investor. The public confuses activity with sophistication. They want to pick, trade, rotate, react. They want their intelligence to look busy. Meanwhile, the low-cost owner of broad productive enterprise, adding steadily and interfering little, often outperforms the whole circus. That is not because complexity is evil. It is because friction is costly and ego is expensive. The paycheck routine that builds wealth does not need to feel exciting every Friday. It needs to work. And once basic market ownership is in place, the next leap becomes available. Cash flowing ownership outside pure salary. This is where I begin parting company with the modern worship of side hustles. I do not like the phrase. It sounds small, frantic, and structurally weak. What I prefer are claims, minority stakes, cash flowing deals, rental assets bought intelligently, business interests, pieces of systems that pay you whether or not you clock in tomorrow. The public hears this and imagines they must immediately become heroic entrepreneurs. That is not what I mean. I mean something calmer. Use salary to fund ownership. Let the paycheck act as seed capital while you remain employed. Learn through small exposures. Buy part of a thing before you fantasize about running the whole thing. That is how intelligent people climb. They do not jump into the dark to prove bravery. They use income to purchase optionality. This is the floor where ordinary people can become something more than employees if they stop asking how to spend their better income and start asking how to convert it into non-salary cash flow. That transition is everything. Now let us go higher. $100,000 to $250,000 a year. This is the pivot floor, and it is full of traps because it flatters the ego. You are now objectively successful by many social standards. You can afford better neighborhoods, better schools, better restaurants, better optics. The system begins offering you a more attractive cage. Many people accept it. That is why so many high earners remain dependent. They think the larger paycheck means they made it, when in reality it only means they now have the choice to become owners, and instead often choose upgraded consumption. This is where the game must change. The paycheck is now large enough to accelerate serious capital formation if treated correctly. It is also large enough to finance a lifestyle that will make you feel rich while keeping you obedient to the next payroll cycle. That is the fork. On this floor, I want to accelerate taxable investing, not because taxes are pleasant, but because flexibility matters. I want broad liquidity that can be deployed. I want liquid capital that can become down payments, deal equity, bridge money, acquisition money. This is where the paycheck routine stops being about retirement alone and starts being about optionality. And this is where I want to talk about ownership with more force. Stop negotiating only for salary. If you are valuable, start looking for equity, profit share, restricted stock, investment alongside operators, access to the cap table, a piece of the economics. The worker asks for a raise, the future owner asks to participate in the upside of the machine itself. That is the maturity leap. Then I want you to begin converting expenses into ownership whenever practical. If you spend serious money in a category and understand the operator, why remain only a customer? Why not become a minority investor? Why not sit close enough to the economics to learn and benefit? This is not universally possible, but it is a mindset worth adopting. It turns life into a map of cash flow opportunities instead of a pure field of consumption. That is how owners think. They do not only ask, what am I paying? They ask, who is receiving this stream? And can I eventually stand on that side? That question will change your life if you keep asking it. Then comes the acceleration floor, 250 to 500,000 and above. At this level, the danger is not ignorance. The danger is indulgence. Lifestyle inflation becomes a genuine threat because the world will now tell you in 1,000 refined ways that your spending should finally catch up to your success. Bigger house, better cars, more memberships, more visible proof. The person tells himself he has earned it. Perhaps he has. That is not the relevant question. The relevant question is what the choice does to his freedom. If every new dollar recruits permanent new obligations, then the person is simply becoming more decorated inside the same old dependency. That is not wealth. It is a more expensive treadmill. This is where I like diversifying into selected alternative assets, but only with principle. Illiquid does not mean sophisticated. Private does not mean better. If you cannot explain how the investment makes money in 3 sentences, you do not understand it well enough. I want alternatives only when the rest of the structure is strong enough to bear them. More importantly, I want the person on this floor to start buying back time. This is one of the great inflection points in a life. At lower levels, do not outsource foolishly, but once your hour is clearly worth more than the tasks filling it, failing to buy back time becomes a hidden self. Sabotage. Use money to remove low-value work from your day. If the release time actually goes toward higher value activity, ownership, thought, deal flow, relationships, or rest that preserves judgment. Otherwise, outsourcing is just vanity in another costume. Time reclaimed must become productive or deeply restorative, not just a new arena for mindless spending. And then comes the real turn, full-time ownership. This is the point at which income from claims can match or exceed your survival number. This is where leaving the job becomes calculation, not fantasy. I have no interest in reckless leaps, but I have every interest in using salary to build until salary is optional. That is the cleanest move in the game. Finally, the penthouse. This is where the paycheck is no longer the center of life. Ownership is entire businesses. Multiple income streams, protection, preservation, legacy. The wage game is over. Capital allocation is the job now. But here's the thing I want you to notice. The penthouse is not created by one giant leap. It is created by the sequence applied correctly on each prior floor. That is the lesson hidden in all of this. 2 people can start on the same salary, the same age, the same city, the same degree, and end in entirely different financial universes because one treated each paycheck like disposable permission while the other treated each paycheck like deployable capital. That is why I keep saying the paycheck is the test, not because payday is dramatic, because payday is repetitive, and repetition is what builds destiny. The public wants a secret. I will give you one. You do not build wealth by impressing people on any floor. You build wealth by learning the correct behavior for that floor and refusing to pretend that the old behavior will take you somewhere it was never designed to go. If you are in the lobby, learn the language. If you are on the ground floor, know the survival number, raise your earning power, and kill the toxic debt. If you are on the next floor, capture the match, use the right accounts, own the broad market, and start building claims beyond salary. If you are higher, accelerate liquidity, pursue equity, invest into cash-flowing structures, and stop negotiating only for pay. If you are higher still, do not let indulgence swallow the capital that should have become freedom. And at the top, think in ownership, protection, and legacy, not merely income. That is the wealth elevator. The public thinks money is a number. It is not. Money is a sequence. And if you get the sequence right often enough, one day the extraordinary thing finally happens. You wake up and realize the next paycheck matters much less than it once did. That is when you know the machine is working. That is when money has stopped being proof and started becoming freedom. That is when the tool is finally serving the life it should have been building all along.